Capítulo 1. The Arrival of the Gospel. The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and fear. Father Gabriel's steps echoed against the cold tiles, each footfall a reminder that he was walking among the dying. He had served in this city for decades, offering last rites and comfort to the forsaken, but nothing could have prepared him for what awaited behind room 217. It was the nurse who first mentioned it. "Father, you might want to see this," she said, her voice tight with unease. On the bedside table of a man gasping for his final breath sat a book. Its leather cover was blacker than midnight, with no title, no author. Only a faint pulse seemed to throb beneath its surface, as if the book itself were alive. Gabriel hesitated. He had read many sacred texts, but this was different. Something about it whispered to him, tugged at his very soul. His hand trembled as he reached for it. The instant his fingers brushed the cover, a chill ran up his spine, sharp and personal. The dying man's eyes widened, and he whispered one word before exhaling his last breath. "Read." Father Gabriel opened the book. The pages were filled with words that seemed to shift when he blinked, letters bleeding into one another, forming patterns he could not understand, yet understood all the same. Each line felt like a confession whispered directly into his mind, each paragraph a warning. The first revelation struck like a thunderclap. It was as if the book knew him. Every sin he had buried, every lie he had told, every soul he had failed to save. The gospel listed them all. He felt his knees weaken, his hands clutching the edge of the bed. The room seemed to darken, shadows crawling along the walls, drawn to the words on the page. And then he heard it, a whisper. Faint at first, like the rustle of dead leaves, then clearer. "Do you want to know the truth?" it asked. The voice was not outside him. It was inside the marrow of his bones. Gabriel wanted to flee, wanted to slam the book shut and run, but some invisible chain held him in place. With every page he turned, the air grew colder. The room seemed to shrink. Faces of the departed flickered in the corners of his vision. Faces he recognized, faces he had failed. The gospel demanded attention, demanded recognition of the sins not only of others but his own. And as he read, he understood a horrifying truth. This book had chosen him. It did not matter that he was alive. It did not matter that the man had died. The gospel waited for those on the brink, those whose hearts beat with the shadow of their last moments. And now, Father Gabriel's time had come. By the time the night nurse returned with medications and coffee, the priest was gone from the corridor. Only the book remained, pulse faint but insistent, waiting for its next reader. Capítulo 2. The Words That Bleed. Father Gabriel awoke to silence, but it was the kind of silence that gnawed at your chest. The hospital room smelled faintly of iron, and in the dim light of dawn, the black book lay open on the floor at the foot of his bed. He swore he had placed it on the table last night, but now it pulsed, as if breathing. With a trembling hand, he reached toward it. The moment his fingers brushed the cracked leather cover, he felt it again. The same cold, intimate tingle that had gripped him the night before. And then he noticed it. One of the letters on the first page was wet, glistening like a drop of blood. His heart pounded. "Impossible," he whispered. But when he turned the page, the words themselves began to ooze red liquid, letters bleeding across the parchment. Gabriel recoiled, but the pull was irresistible. Each drop carried a name, a secret, a crime, things no living person could know. The first name made him freeze. Sister Helena. Gabriel had always considered her the model of piety, devoted and gentle. Yet the words spelled out her sin in cruel, vivid detail. A theft, yes, but more insidious. The silent betrayals, the whispered contempt she harbored in the chapel. He tried to look away, but the book demanded his gaze. Another name, a child who had perished in his parish months ago. The gospel described the fear in the boy's final moments and, with merciless clarity, hinted that Gabriel's own hesitation had contributed to it. His stomach turned, bile rising in his throat. As he read, the words began to whisper. Soft at first, like wind through autumn leaves, then growing louder, more insistent. "See them," the voices hissed. "See what you cannot escape." Shadows moved along the walls, twisting, folding into forms almost human, almost familiar. Faces he knew flickered and vanished in the corners of his eyes. The dead, the dying, the forgotten. And then the blood lettering writhed. Letters stretched, contracted, merging into shapes that resembled crucifixes, inverted and dripping. Each symbol burned into Gabriel's mind, etching guilt, shame, and dread. He felt his own sins crawl over his skin, invisible fingers pressing, pulling, dragging him toward the inevitable. A sound came from behind, a low, rattling whisper. Gabriel spun. The room was empty, but in the reflection of the bedside monitor, he saw a face he did not recognize. It was pale, hollow-eyed, mouth open in silent anguish. The book's words, his words, now were spilling from its throat in rivers of scarlet ink. Gabriel understood, with a terror that made his knees buckle. The gospel did not merely record sins. It demanded acknowledgement, and if ignored, it would write them in blood, using him as the pen. The book pulsed once, twice, as if satisfied. Then the voices quieted, the shadows withdrew. But Gabriel knew it was only a pause, a breath before the storm. Outside, the hospital's corridors were waking. Inside, a priest sat alone with a book that bled, not from ink, but from life itself, and he had read only the first page. Capítulo 3, The Whispering Confessions. Father Gabriel could no longer tell if the hospital was awake or if he had crossed some threshold into a place outside time. The black book lay open before him, its pages trembling as if alive, waiting. But it was no longer the words that drew him in. It was the whispers. Soft at first, like the brushing of dry leaves against a tombstone, they began to form sentences. "You cannot hide. You cannot hide." The voice was close inside his skull, echoing his own thoughts back at him in a warped reflection. Gabriel's hands shook. He wanted to run, but the book's gravity anchored him. He leaned closer. The whispers took shape, becoming confessions, intimate, impossible confessions. The book spoke of sins he had never shared, fears he had buried beneath decades of devotion. One voice trembled. "You left him alone." It was the voice of a child, long gone, accusing him of neglect in his parish, of failing to comfort a soul on the brink. Gabriel's chest tightened. Then another came, harsher this time, like a chain scraping across stone. "Do you remember her? The nun who trusted you?" Sister Helena's betrayal, the one he had seen in the bleeding words, was now audible, puncturing the silence, demanding his acknowledgement. He felt a heat crawl over his skin, shame and dread intertwining, suffocating him. The book's pages flickered, whispers multiplied, overlapping, voices colliding. Gabriel could hear the confessions of strangers, of the living and the dead, spilling secrets he was never meant to know. Lovers' lies, unspoken vows, sins buried beneath holy water, they all poured into his mind. The gospel did not merely reveal, it demanded witness. A shadow moved in the corner of the room. Gabriel's eyes followed, but it was fluid, a ripple in the air rather than a solid form. The whispers coalesced into a figure, a priest or perhaps himself, faceless and dripping black ink. The figure extended a hand. "Will you confess?" it asked, voice hollow, echoing inside the marrow of his bones. Gabriel wanted to scream, but the words would not leave his mouth. They had been stolen, trapped by the book, forced to twist and curl inside his chest. All he could do was nod, and as he did, the whispers grew louder, closer, intimate. They began to speak in the voices of those he had failed, their pain tangible, pressing against him like weighty cloth. He understood with a clarity that burned. This gospel required more than reading. It required surrender, acknowledgement, a confrontation with the sins of the self and others. And the cost of refusal was already written in the ink that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat on the page. The bedside light flickered, shadows dancing like grotesque marionettes across the walls. A single word, carved from whispered agony, reverberated in his mind: repent. And for the first time, Father Gabriel felt the true terror of the gospel. It was not merely a book. It was a mirror, a confessional, a sentence. He did not close it. He could not. Capítulo 4, The Choir of the Dying. Father Gabriel's nights had begun to blur into one continuous, suffocating vigil. The black book never left his side, its leather cover cold and pulsing like a living heart. And then the singing began. It started as a whisper in the hallways, a faint melodic hum, impossible to pinpoint. He thought at first it was a hallucination, the result of too many sleepless nights spent hovering over the dying. But as the sound grew, a terrible understanding settled in. It was the patients, all of them, singing, but not songs of prayer, not hymns of comfort. Each note carried their fear, their guilt, their regrets, a resonance that clawed at the soul. Gabriel stepped into the corridor, heart hammering. The sound swelled as he walked, a chorus that seemed to rise from the walls themselves. Faces he knew, patients who had seemed peaceful in life, now contorted with terror, eyes wide, mouths open in silent screams that somehow produced melody. Their voices intertwined with the gospel's whispers, forming a symphony of despair that pressed into him like water into lungs. He reached room 302. The door was ajar. Inside, the source became grotesquely clear. A man, near death, sat upright in bed, eyes rolled back, mouth moving in perfect, unnerving harmony with the choir. The gospel lay open on his chest. The letters bled as they had before, but now, the blood seemed to thrum with the rhythm of the song. Gabriel's stomach churned. He realized the music was alive, the book conducting a requiem for the damned. One note struck Gabriel in particular, a note that was almost a voice, calling his name, accusing him. He looked around, but the hallway was empty. The choir continued, swelling to a deafening crescendo, a flood of sound that threatened to shatter his mind. Each patient's song carried a confession, a story of failure and sin, their last moments intertwined with the verses of the gospel. Gabriel understood with a dreadful clarity. The book had turned their deaths into instruments. It did not simply record the sins of the dying, it orchestrated them, forcing their voices into a ritual, a confession set to a melody of horror. And he, the priest, was the conductor it demanded. He stepped forward, compelled, hands trembling. Every patient's gaze was on him, even those whose bodies lay still, hollow eyes pleading for acknowledgement, for absolution that he might not be able to give. His own name echoed through the choir, carried on a note of pure accusation. Repent, confess, witness. The whispers threaded through the melody, insistent, unyielding. Gabriel's throat tightened. Words refused to come. And yet, as he bent over the black book, he could feel it guiding him, showing him the path he must take, one note, one confession at a time. The lights flickered. The song peaked, a wailing harmony that pressed against the very air of the hospital. Gabriel realized the truth. The choir was endless, a cycle of voices trapped between life and death, and the book fed on their fear and sorrow. And in the center of it all, the gospel pulsed like a heart, waiting for him to conduct the next note. Capítulo 5, the mirror of judgment. Father Gabriel's reflection had never frightened him, until now. It began with a whisper, soft and insistent, drifting from the black book as he read in the solitude of the hospital chapel. The candlelight trembled across the stone walls, casting shadows that danced like specters. And there, in the polished surface of a ceremonial mirror, he saw himself, but not himself. The reflection was older, hollow-eyed, and drenched in shadows. The book's words seemed to crawl off the page and twist across the glass, forming shapes that he could not fully comprehend. Every line he had read, every confession he had absorbed, now materialized in the mirror's world, replaying his failures in slow, agonizing detail. He reached out, fingertips grazing the cold glass, and the reflection did not move. It smiled, and in that smile, he saw everything he had hidden, the sins he had concealed behind prayers, the moments he had failed to act, the faces of those he could not save. The whispers rose in pitch, a chorus of accusation. See them, see yourself, see what lies beneath the veil of faith. They carried the voices of the dying, the betrayed, the forgotten. Every soul whose life had intersected with his passed judgment through that mirrored surface. Gabriel stumbled backward. The chapel seemed to expand, walls stretching, the shadows reaching toward him, eager to drag him into the reflection. He realized then that the mirror did not merely show truth, it demanded acknowledgement. To deny it would be to invite the gospel's judgment. A new figure appeared behind him in the mirror, a young boy, pale and frail, the same boy whose death had haunted Gabriel for months. The boy's lips moved silently, forming the words Gabriel dreaded. The reflection of his own mouth began to mirror the boy's, and he heard it in his mind. You could have saved me. The priest's knees buckled, and the black book thumped against the floor as if trying to escape. Its pages flipped violently, letters spilling like inked blood onto the chapel tiles. With each line, new reflections emerged, faces of the parishioners, the faithful, the unfaithful, all twisted in silent screams. Every sin, every omission, every betrayal of trust was etched into the mirror's glass. And then, the worst revelation, his reflection raised a hand, pointing at him with a finger blackened by ink. The book's whispers became deafening. "You are judged. You are the witness. You are the sinner." Gabriel fell to the floor, chest heaving, hands clutching the polished stone. The candlelight flickered one last time, casting the mirror into utter darkness. When the light returned, the reflections were gone, leaving only the black book, its pages trembling, waiting. But Gabriel knew the truth. The mirror of judgment would return. Every soul he touched, every confession he witnessed, every death he faced would reflect back at him through that glass. And when it came, he would have to confront not just the sins of others, but the sins he had refused to acknowledge in himself. The gospel pulsed once, slow and deliberate, as if savoring his fear. And Father Gabriel realized that no sanctuary, no prayer, no absolution could shield him from what was coming. The mirror had judged, and the judgment was only beginning. Capítulo 6. The Angel of Regret. The night was heavy with rain, each drop tapping against the hospital windows like the ticking of a funeral clock. Father Gabriel had locked himself in the chapel, the black book open before him, pages quivering as though alive. He had read, confessed, and listened to the whispers, yet relief remained a stranger. Fear had rooted itself in his chest, and guilt twisted in his stomach like a living thing. It was then he saw the angel. Not the radiant, comforting figures of Scripture. No, this one was something else entirely. Its wings were ragged, blackened at the edges, feathers dissolving into smoke. Its face was blank, smooth as marble, yet Gabriel felt its eyes pierce through him, straight into the marrow of his soul. "You have come far," the angel said, voice hollow yet intimate, echoing inside the priest's mind. "But do you understand what you carry?" Gabriel swallowed hard. His throat was dry and words seemed useless. The angel's presence was suffocating, pressing against his very bones. He felt the weight of every soul he had failed, every prayer unanswered, every life left untended. The black book quivered, pulsing in harmony with his heart. The angel extended a hand, not in mercy but in accusation. A spectral vision unfurled above the chapel floor, the faces of the dead he had known, the dying he had prayed over, the ones whose suffering had slipped past him unnoticed. Each figure whispered a memory, a regret, a condemnation. Gabriel's own face appeared among them, eyes wide, hands trembling. "You hid the truth. You told yourself faith would absolve your inaction," the angel intoned. "And yet, here you are, still running, still afraid." Gabriel fell to his knees. Tears blurred his vision, but the angel's blank stare held him in place. The black book's pages fluttered violently, words bleeding into shapes, hands, eyes, mouths, each one echoing a choice he had made, each one a testament to his failures. Why am I shown this?" he whispered. His voice broke under the weight of sorrow and fear. "To see your sins is to know your place among the living and the dead," the angel replied. "You cannot hide behind faith alone. You are accountable. Every confession you hear, every soul you witness will come back to you, and when it does..." The wings of the angel stretched, filling the chapel with shadow. The air became cold, biting, thick with the scent of damp stone and inked blood. Gabriel felt his mind reel, visions of lives lost, cries unheard, and prayers unanswered flooding him. Each one was a chain, binding him to the gospel, to its demands, to its terrifying purpose. "You must not falter," the angel whispered, voice now almost tender, though no warmth lay within it. "Regret is the key. Without it, you cannot face what comes next." Gabriel bowed his head, understanding in a shiver of despair. The angel's form began to dissolve into smoke, but its presence lingered, a shadow upon his soul. He was alone again, save for the black book, throbbing softly on the altar. Yet he knew the truth. The angel had left him with a warning, a burden heavier than any cross he had ever carried. Every sin, every life, every whispered confession was now part of him, and the gospel, hungry, patient, relentless, would demand he face them all. The rain outside slowed, but inside Father Gabriel, a storm had only begun. Capítulo 7. The Hall of Lost Souls. The hospital corridors had changed. Father Gabriel knew it before he even stepped forward. The air was thicker, colder, vibrating with whispers that seemed to come from inside the walls themselves. The black book pulsed against his chest, guiding him like a compass whose needle pointed only toward dread. And then he saw the door. It was a plain wooden door, unmarked, tucked between the emergency ward and the chapel, one he was certain had never been there before. The whispers intensified, a chorus of pleading voices, some soft, some urgent, some accusing. Gabriel's hand shook as he turned the knob. The hallway beyond stretched endlessly, impossibly long, lined with doors that led nowhere, walls that seemed to breathe. The air smelled of damp stone, decay, and something faintly metallic like blood long dried. He could see shadows moving within the halls, figures of the dying, or perhaps of the dead, reaching out with hollow eyes, mouths opening but no sound emerging. As he walked, the black book pulsed faster. Words flickered across the pages on their own, spelling names, sins, and whispered confessions he had never heard before. Each name corresponded to a figure in the hall, trapped in an endless loop of suffering. Some writhed in terror, others sat in silence, staring at him with eyes that burned with expectation. The whispers became voices. A woman's voice called, "Father, help me." Another, a man, begged, "Confess, before it's too late." Gabriel's chest tightened. He wanted to speak, to reassure them, to absolve them. But the gospel had taken his words. They remained trapped in his throat, twisting and curling like smoke. The hallway seemed to shift as he walked. Doors led to nowhere. Corridors looped back impossibly. Shadows lengthened and shrank in a rhythm all their own. The souls he passed whispered fragments of their lives, regrets, betrayals, lies they had told, secrets they had hidden. And all of it was reflected in the black book, as if it were a living mirror of the hall itself. A sudden chill made him turn. A figure emerged from the mist. A child, eyes wide with fear, clutching a small, tattered toy. "Will you save me, Father?" the boy whispered. Gabriel's heart seized. He reached for him, but the child dissolved into mist, leaving only a lingering wail that echoed down the endless hallway. Then he understood. The hall was infinite, and the souls within it were not just ghosts. They were warnings. Every sin he had encountered, every confession he had heard, every life he had touched was tied here, waiting. The gospel was not just a book. It was a key, a doorway, a trap, and a judge all at once. Father Gabriel felt the first real shiver of true terror. He realized that walking the hall was walking his own conscience, that each step forced him to confront the suffering of those he could not save, the truths he had avoided, the sins he had buried deep. And at the end of this hall, a doorway opened on its own. Beyond it, a faint light beckoned, warm yet impossibly distant, promising both revelation and ruin. The black book pulsed insistently, urging him forward. He took a deep breath, stepping toward the light, knowing that once he crossed that threshold, there would be no turning back. Capítulo 8. The Seal of Silence. Father Gabriel's voice had always been his weapon, his solace, and his prayer. But the moment he crossed the threshold into the Hall of Lost Souls, the black book pulsed violently, and a cold, invisible weight pressed down on his throat. When he tried to speak, even a single word, no sound emerged, only a strangled gasp that seemed to echo inside his own skull. The whispers of the hall shifted immediately, now tinged with something darker: expectation, accusation, hunger. They murmured secrets he had never spoken, sins he had never confessed, and still he could do nothing but listen. The book lay open in his hands, letters writhing like serpents, and Gabriel realized with a chill that it had sealed him. A low voice emerged, not from the walls, not from the shadows, but from the very air around him. "Speak, and you die. Silent, and you watch." He froze. His heart thundered in panic. The ghosts in the hall pressed closer, spectral hands reaching, faces twisted in silent screams, their mouths moving, uttering words that only he could understand. One by one, they revealed truths he had never dared acknowledge. Betrayals, hidden lusts, moments of cowardice. each confession carved deeper into his soul. Gabriel tried to pray, lips moving soundlessly. The words died before leaving his mouth. Tears blurred his vision, and the ghosts' faces became sharper, more accusing, as if they were demanding not just acknowledgement, but utter submission. Every breath felt like inhaling shards of glass. He stumbled forward, and the floor beneath him seemed to pulse like the beating of a giant, unseen heart. The whispers became a chorus, each one tugging at his mind, pulling memories from decades past. There was a mother who had died waiting for a blessing he had never given, a child whose final cry he had failed to hear, a parishioner whose secret sin he had ignored. All of them converged, pressing in from every direction. And then, a new figure appeared, tall, silent, cloaked in shadow. The angel from his earlier visions, its wings stretched wide, black smoke curling from the tips. It did not speak, yet Gabriel felt the command in every fiber of his being. You will observe, not intervene. The priest's knees buckled. He wanted to scream, to warn the living, to plead with the dying, but his voice was gone, stolen by the gospel itself. The black book pulsed in his hands, almost jubilant, feeding on his helplessness, on the frustration, on the dread of silence. Hours passed, or was it days? Time had become meaningless in this hall. Gabriel wandered among the lost souls, witnessing confessions, sins, fears, and regrets. The weight of knowing without the ability to speak twisted his mind, a slow, grinding agony. At last a faint light appeared ahead, a doorway leading back to the world of the living, but the whispers followed, insistent. Gabriel realized the truth. The seal of silence was not just punishment, it was preparation. He would carry every confession, every sin, every regret with him, but the gospel demanded he keep them within, silent witnesses to horrors he could never speak of. With a trembling hand, he placed the book on the floor before the doorway. The whispers softened, but they did not stop, and Father Gabriel stepped out into the hospital, voiceless, carrying the weight of truths he could never share. The gospel had claimed its price. Capítulo 9, the blood that writes. Father Gabriel awoke to the taste of iron in his mouth. The hospital room was silent, but the silence was thick, heavy, almost alive. On the bedside table lay the black book, its cover slick with something warm. He reached out, and his fingers brushed it, then recoiled. The book throbbed as if it had a heartbeat of its own. A single drop of crimson oozed from the spine, falling onto the first page. Gabriel gasped. The letters beneath the droplet writhed, twisted, reshaping themselves. And then he understood. The book was writing, not in ink, but in blood. His blood. Panic surged. He looked down at his hands, palms trembling, veins pulsing unnaturally. One drop fell from a small nick on his finger, and instantly the page responded. Names appeared, sins recorded, moments of shame and betrayal inked in scarlet script that burned like fire on the paper. The gospel had begun to claim him, making him both reader and scribe, prisoner and witness. The whispers returned, louder this time, insistent. Write, record, witness. They did not demand words but life, the very essence of living. Every heartbeat, every drop of blood that fell fed the gospel, filling the pages with horrors that only Gabriel could conjure, only he could see. The room around him shifted. Shadows stretched and twisted into shapes of the damned, figures he had known, people whose lives he had touched, faces he had tried to save but failed. They reached toward him, their hands dripping with the ink of their own regrets, their voices layered atop the gospel's insatiable whispers. Gabriel felt each one pressing into him, demanding acknowledgement, demanding the truth. He tried to pull away, but the book's pulse had synced with his own heart. Every beat forced him to write. Every drop of blood dragged secrets from the depths of his memory. Every confession he had ever heard or ignored spilling onto the pages. And then the most horrifying realization struck. The book was alive because it fed on truth and fear, and now it had found a willing source in him. His own sins, his own failures, his own doubts were no longer hidden. They were inked in living blood, immortalized in the gospel's pages. A shadow fell across the page, stretching long and impossibly wide. Father Gabriel looked up. The angel from before hovered above him, wings dripping shadows, face blank but judgment clear. "You are the pen now," it said, voice like shattered glass. "Every soul, every confession, every death you witness will flow through you. Resist, and you will be written into the book itself." Gabriel's chest tightened. Fear, despair, and determination clashed in his mind. He had no choice. He could not stop. Every drop of his blood, every heartbeat became a line, a paragraph, a story etched into the pages of a gospel that fed on life itself. The first page was full. The next trembled, waiting. Outside the hospital window, the storm raged on. Inside, Father Gabriel bled truth onto paper. Trapped between life and death, sinner and scribe, witness and victim, and the gospel whispered its final command of the night: continue, or be consumed. Father Gabriel woke to silence once more. But it was not peaceful. It was the silence of waiting, thick as blood, filled with the weight of countless unspoken confessions. The black book lay open before him, its pages trembling like the breath of the dying. But now the whispers had grown louder, heavier, forming voices that spoke with intent, purpose, and malice. From the corners of the room, shadows began to detach themselves from the walls. They were dark, shapeless at first, but gradually they stretched, twisted, coalesced into figures. Men, women, and children Gabriel had known, all spectral and hollow-eyed. Their mouths moved, and even though no sound emerged, he could hear their voices, clear as though carried directly into his mind. "You ignored us," one whispered. "You failed us," another hissed. "You are the witness," a chorus echoed, overlapping, suffocating. Gabriel's throat constricted. He wanted to speak, to offer solace, to pray, but the seal of silence still held. His own voice was gone, stolen by the gospel. All he could do was watch, helpless, as the shadows began to preach, not to anyone living, but through him. They spoke truths he had never admitted aloud: betrayals, sins of omission, moments of cowardice, hidden desires, and regrets so deep they clawed at his very bones. The black book pulsed violently in his hands, reacting to every thought, every memory. Words bled across the pages, forming sermons of dread and confessions of the damned. Gabriel realized with a growing horror that the shadows used him as a conduit. The living could not hear them, but through his mind. Their preaching became tangible, almost real. Each word carved guilt into his soul. He staggered back, the room bending around him. The shadows multiplied, filling every corner, creeping over walls and ceiling. Their preaching became a chorus, rising to a crescendo of accusation. Faces he thought he had forgotten appeared, parishioners whose secrets he had ignored, patients whose suffering he had overlooked, colleagues whose sins he had silently condoned. All spoke through him now, their voices unified, accusing. Gabriel sank to his knees, palms pressed against the cold floor. The black book's pages fluttered as if caught in a wind he could not feel. Every heartbeat made the shadows' preaching more insistent, more intimate. He felt as though his very soul was being transcribed onto the paper, each line a sermon he did not choose to deliver. And then, a single voice rose above the rest. It was faint, yet it cut through the cacophony. A child's voice, trembling but clear. "Will you save us, Father?" Gabriel's chest tightened. Tears streamed silently down his face. The shadows halted, hovering, their forms shimmering. He realized the gospel had done more than trap him. It had made him the preacher for the lost, the conduit for the confessions, the witness for the damned. He bowed over the black book, palms clutching its pulsing leather, and knew one immutable truth. The shadows would not rest. The preaching would never end. And he was bound, forever, to carry the words of the dying, the whispers of the lost, and the confessions of the damned. The gospel had claimed its preacher. Capítulo 11, the Seraphim's Curse. Father Gabriel awoke to a sound like tearing silk, yet it was not silk. It was the world itself splitting open, bending reality around him. The hospital walls had disappeared. He was no longer in any earthly space, but in a vast, colorless void, stretching infinitely in every direction. And in that void, a figure descended. It was a seraphim, but not the angels of light that Scripture promised. Its wings burned with black fire, feathers curling and snapping like live embers. Its eyes were voids, empty and infinite, and its voice tore through Gabriel's mind without moving its lips. "You have read the gospel. You have witnessed the confessions. You have carried the burdens of the dying," it said, each word a lash across his soul. And yet, you remain flawed. You are not absolved. Gabriel tried to kneel, tried to pray, but the seraphim's presence pressed him flat against the invisible floor of the void. The black book hovered in front of him, its pages thrumming violently. Words scrawled themselves in living crimson ink, his sins, his failures, his secrets, turning the pages into a mirror of his soul. Every confession you have heard, every life you have touched, every word you failed to speak, these are yours. The seraphim continued, voice now a chorus of thousands, and for each there will be reckoning. The void shimmered, and suddenly Gabriel was surrounded by visions. Each patient he had failed appeared, eyes burning with accusation. Each shadow he had witnessed, each whisper he had absorbed, materialized as a tormented soul, writhing in impossible shapes. They were both dead and living, real and spectral, and all directed their suffering toward him. The seraphim extended a hand, and the black book opened wide. Its pages turned faster than human eyes could follow, ink spilling in rivers of blood. Gabriel felt a searing pain, his own blood, his own life force being drawn into the pages, binding him irrevocably to the gospel. "You are cursed," the seraphim intoned, "cursed to witness without reprieve, cursed to carry the confessions, cursed to live as the eternal scribe of the dying. Every step, every heartbeat, every prayer will be weighed and recorded." Gabriel screamed, but no sound came. His voice had been stolen long ago. He was trapped between the living and the dead, a vessel for the horrors of countless souls, powerless to intervene, powerless to flee. The seraphim lowered its face close to his, and for a fraction of a second, Gabriel thought he saw pity, but it was quickly replaced by a judgmental glare. Then, with a sweep of black wings, the angel vanished, leaving him in the void alone, the black book open and throbbing like a living heart. The whispers returned, hundreds of voices weaving together in unholy harmony. Gabriel understood with sick clarity that the curse was complete. He was no longer merely a priest or a witness. He was a part of the gospel itself, an eternal instrument of its judgment and revelation. And in the distance, the black void pulsed, echoing the words he could never speak aloud. "The confessions never end, neither shall you." Capitolo 12, the final benediction. Father Gabriel's hands trembled as he gripped the black book. Its leather cover pulsed with a heartbeat that was not his own, each thump a summons, a warning, a demand. The whispers that had haunted him for weeks, no, months, had grown into a chorus, filling the hospital with voices that had never been alive and yet were undeniably real. Tonight was different. The air was thick, saturated with the scent of iron and decay. Shadows stretched longer than possible, coiling around the corners of the chapel like living serpents. The gospel had led him here, to the altar, where a single candle flickered weakly, its flame struggling against a wind that he could not feel. He opened the book. Pages turned on their own, revealing words that bled and shimmered in crimson and black. Each line told a story of sin, of betrayal, of confessions unspoken, regrets unatoned. Gabriel's chest tightened as he read. These were not merely the confessions of the dying. They were instructions, a path he was being forced to follow. A shadow fell across the altar, and the air grew colder. From it emerged the seraphim, wings blackened and smoking, eyes hollow and infinite. "The gospel's purpose is complete," it intoned, voice a blend of judgment and inevitability. "Now comes the final benediction. Will you seal it, or be consumed?" Gabriel's heart pounded. The altar before him was no longer wood. It was a reflection of the void, a mirror of every soul he had failed, every confession he had heard, every life he had touched. He realized with a sickening clarity that he was not merely a priest here. He was the instrument of final judgment. The whispers rose to a roar, 1,000 voices clamoring for absolution, vengeance, mercy, recognition. Gabriel could feel each one pressing into him, demanding release, demanding witness. The black book throbbed violently in his hands, as if it could no longer contain the weight of the truths it had absorbed. And then he saw it, the choice. To seal the gospel would mean binding himself permanently to the book, to the whispers, to the eternal judgment of souls. To refuse would invite destruction, annihilation, a final silence worse than death. The seraphim's eyes bored into him, waiting, patient, inevitable. Tears streamed down Gabriel's face. His lips moved silently, words trapped by the seal of silence, prayers unspoken. He raised the book high above the altar. Every heartbeat, every pulse of blood, every memory of failure surged through him. And then he pressed the book down, the leather cool and living against his palms. A flash of light seared the chapel, shadows recoiling, whispers screaming. The candle flickered, then burned steady, a pale gold flame against the darkness. The seraphim bowed slowly, and then vanished into smoke, leaving Gabriel alone, trembling. The gospel sealed, but alive, still throbbing with the echoes of every confession it had absorbed. Father Gabriel sank to the altar, chest heaving. He was free, yet bound, alive, yet a part of the gospel itself. He understood the truth with a clarity that was both horrifying and sublime. Some prayers are never answered, some confessions never end, and some souls, once chosen, become eternal witnesses to the living and the dead. The final benediction had been given, and Father Gabriel, trembling, whispered into the silence of his own heart, "Amen," and yet it continues.
Epilogue: The Gospel never ends. Father Gabriel returned to the world of the living. But he was no longer the man he had been. The hospital smelled the same. The walls stood in familiar angles. The candles flickered in the chapel as if nothing had changed. Yet everything had changed. He carried the weight of countless souls, their confessions etched into his very being, a burden invisible to all but himself. The black book rested in his hands, sealed, yet alive. Its heartbeat pulsed in rhythm with his own, a reminder that the gospel did not sleep, did not rest, and would not be silenced. Even as he moved through the quiet corridors, whispers fluttered at the edges of perception. Not all were gone. Some still lingered, delicate and sharp, coaxing him to read, to witness, to record. He knelt in the chapel, hands trembling over the altar. Memories surged, the mirror of judgment, the angel of regret, the hall of lost souls, the seraphim's curse. Every torment, every revelation, every whispered secret had left its mark. He was both priest and pen, witness and sinner, scribe and condemned. Outside, the world continued as always. The sun rose, the wind stirred, footsteps echoed through hallways. To anyone else, it was a normal day. But Father Gabriel knew better. The gospel was patient. It watched, it waited, and the dead, it hungered for the living. He whispered, silently, as always, a prayer that had no sound but carried meaning all the same. May I bear the weight without breaking. May I witness without faltering. May the confessions find release. And yet, may I survive. A chill swept through the chapel. The black book trembled, as if acknowledging his words, as if promising that the burden was eternal. Gabriel felt it, the faintest pulse of movement from the shadows, a ripple in the air, a murmur of voices he had not yet heard. The gospel was not done. It never would be. He rose, shoulders heavy, eyes hollow but resolute. The book's heartbeat matched his own, a rhythm that would never end. Every step he took echoed through the corridors of the living and the dead alike. Each one a testimony, each one a warning. The world might never know what he had witnessed, the horrors he had borne, the whispers he carried. And yet, the gospel waited, always hungry, always patient, always eternal. For every dying soul, there was a confession, and for every confession, there was Father Gabriel. He walked into the hospital halls once more, silent, unseen, yet fully present, and somewhere, in the shadows between life and death, the first whispers of a new soul began. The gospel had never ended.